They called her by a number, not a name. She entered the courtroom in cuffs. No lawyer, no family, no defense. Just a steel gaze and a silence that unsettled the room. They thought she was just another disgraced soldier, until the bailiff opened her file, and the Admiral in the gallery stood up. The judge paused. The prosecution went pale, because what was inside that folder wasn't supposed to exist. Not yet. Not ever. Welcome to the storyscape, where forgotten heroes finally get their voice. Before we begin, let us know which city you're watching from. And if you believe this story deserves to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us keep their memory alive. The courthouse was unusually full for a Monday morning. Sunlight filtered through the high windows of courtroom 2A, falling across rows of polished benches and the silent anticipation of those seated within them. Family members, reporters, and government officials all waited, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled judgment. At the center of it all, behind a wooden defense table scarred by decades of use, sat the woman they had all come to see. She didn't look like much at first glance. Not tall, not particularly loud, and dressed in standard civilian attire, a navy blazer over a button-up shirt, slacks, hair tightly pinned back. There were no military ribbons, no formal uniform, just a subtle intensity in her gaze. Something simmered beneath her stillness, something the courtroom had yet to recognize. Her name was Eleanor Hartley, and she was once the most feared sniper in SEAL Team history, a phantom operator whose missions never made the news and whose existence was denied for years by those who trained her. Most didn't know her name, and those who did only whispered it. But today, she wasn't seated as a soldier. She was a defendant, accused of obstruction of justice, unauthorized disclosure of government materials, and violating the classified handling protocols of Section 12B, all stemming from a single decision: delivering evidence in a case no one else dared to touch. A case involving a dishonorably discharged officer, a cover-up buried beneath 2 decades of silence, and a family left with nothing but a folded flag. She had shown up in court voluntarily. No legal team, no press conference, no entourage. Just her and a small leather bag. From the moment she stepped into the courthouse lobby, tension had followed her like a shadow. Security didn't recognize her name at first. There was nothing in the system linking Eleanor Hartley to anything but a string of sealed files and redacted pages. She walked through metal detectors calmly, but when her bag was flagged for secondary screening, everything slowed. Inside, tucked between old field notes and a sealed black case, was an original hard drive, government property. She never resisted, never raised her voice. She simply stood still while the guards whispered into radios and gestured toward the handcuffs. That's how she entered courtroom 2A, in restraints. Click. Both hands in front of her, bound in steel as if she were a criminal. Cameras flashed, people leaned forward. The judge had yet to take the bench, but the jury pool was already half-seated. Most of them stared, confused by the silent woman who didn't flinch, didn't frown, didn't look away. In the front row, a retired military correspondent narrowed his eyes. Something about the way she stood, the way her boots aligned perfectly under her body, told him she wasn't who they thought she was. Eleanor sat down slowly. Her wrists were freed once she reached her seat, but the damage had been done. The image was burned into every phone and press pass in the room. The prosecutor, a clean-shaven man with sharp suits and sharper ambition, smirked as he arranged his files. He called her reckless, emotionally unstable, a disgraced former contractor turned rogue. His voice rang out confidently across the courtroom. She didn't respond, didn't interrupt, didn't even blink. Instead, her eyes moved toward the rear doors, because she knew what no one else did. Someone was coming. The moment happened quietly. Just before opening statements, the double doors creaked open. The murmurs died. Uniformed guards turned slightly toward the movement and then froze as a single man stepped through. Rear Admiral Franklin Ridgway. Full dress uniform, chest lined with ribbons and stars, the silver insignia of naval special warfare glinting on his collar. He didn't sit. He walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, not fast, but with the deliberate weight of someone used to commanding rooms and battlefields alike. When he reached the gallery rail, he paused and saluted, not to the judge, not to the flags, but to Eleanor Hartley. And in that moment, everyone knew something wasn't right about this case. Something important had been hidden, and the woman sitting silently at the defendant's table was not the villain they thought she was.
She had been sent here by truth. And maybe she wasn't alone. The evidence bag was still sealed when it landed on the judge's bench, a transparent pouch marked confidential, eyes only, with a chain of custody slip that had more redacted lines than visible ones. Inside was a slim, government-issued solid-state drive, the kind not meant to be removed from secure facilities, much less delivered by hand to a civilian courthouse. And yet, there it was, and the courtroom was about to discover why. Judge Callahan, a veteran of the bench with 30 years of federal experience, squinted at the file's label, then at the sealed envelope attached to its front. He recognized the classification level, Tier Sigma 2. That wasn't standard military protocol. That was special access material, Black Ops tier, need to know only. He raised an eyebrow. "Miss Hartley," he said, leaning forward just slightly, "I've been told you have waived your right to legal representation." Eleanor nodded once. "And that you personally transported this evidence to my courtroom?" Another nod. The prosecutor objected immediately. "Your Honor, we still dispute the authenticity of this drive. There is no official record of its existence in the Joint Evidence Database, and the defendant has already admitted to obtaining it through unauthorized means." Eleanor finally spoke. "There's no official record because they wiped it clean," she said calmly. "Just like they wiped the names of the 3 Marines who died in Kandahar on October 4th, 2009. I was there. And this," she gestured to the drive, "is the last unaltered record of that day." Her voice didn't rise, she didn't plead. It was a statement of fact. And somehow, that quiet certainty shook the room more than any shouting could have. The judge motioned to the clerk. "Prepare the playback system." A projector whirred to life as court officers positioned the monitor where both the judge and jury could see. Eleanor remained seated, hands folded in front of her, the faint trace of an old scar visible on her wrist, the kind that didn't come from an accident. As the screen blinked on, the courtroom dimmed. And then it started. At first, it was just noise, a grainy black and white thermal feed from a helmet cam marked with a timestamp and military overlay. Desert terrain, a convoy, distant chatter in coded radio transmissions. The video quality was poor, but the audio was crystal clear.
What followed was not part of any public record. A mission marked as failed due to a spontaneous ambush. But the footage showed no ambush. It showed something far worse: hesitation, a deliberate delay in providing support, a superior officer's voice overriding a direct request for backup, a decision that left a unit exposed for over 14 minutes without air cover, enough time for a coordinated enemy strike that claimed 4 lives, including a civilian interpreter. And then, silence. The camera caught a final frame. Eleanor dragging a wounded Marine behind a Humvee, firing one-handed. Then, black. Gasps filled the courtroom. The prosecutor leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor! This footage is unverified. We have no way of confirming." "It's verified by the blood of the men who didn't come back," Eleanor interrupted coldly. That silence again. Not from fear, but because everyone in that room, judge, jury, and spectator alike, had just felt something shift. The courtroom was no longer just a legal theater. It had become a battlefield of truth. And Eleanor Hartley was not just defending herself, she was indicting a system. Judge Callahan sat back slowly. He didn't say a word for several moments. Then, "We'll recess for 1 hour, and I want someone from the Department of Defense in my chambers by the end of that break." The prosecutor tried to speak again, but Callahan cut him off. "Counselor, sit down. You just watched what the rest of us did. If you want to argue chain of custody, you better bring a damn good reason why the Pentagon's ghost units are popping up in my courtroom." Eleanor stood as the court emptied. Admiral Ridgway hadn't moved. He was still in the back, still watching her. And when she caught his eye, he gave her the smallest of nods, because he remembered. He was there too. He just didn't have the courage to speak until now. They thought the video was the bombshell. It wasn't. The real detonation came when Eleanor Hartley reached into her satchel and pulled out a silver velvet box. No sound in the courtroom except the faint click of the latch opening. Then silence, a heavy, loaded silence. Inside was a medal, a glimmering, untouched bronze star with a small V device affixed to the ribbon. Valor. She placed it gently on the defense table. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Judge Callahan stared. He had presided over hundreds of military cases, seen dozens of medals, but something in her handling of it, something in the careful, almost reluctant reverence she gave it, suggested this wasn't pride. This was grief, shaped into metal. The prosecutor looked at it too, squinting as if hoping it was a replica. "You received this for the Kandahar operation?" "No," Eleanor said softly. "They mailed it to my sister." "Excuse me?" "I was unconscious for 3 days after the mission. By the time I woke up, the files were sealed. My CO was gone, and the only thing they ever said to me was that I'd served with distinction. They couldn't even hand it to me in person." She didn't look at the medal. In fact, she seemed to hate looking at it. "I left it in a drawer for 12 years, she said. "But I brought it here, because that little V," she tapped the device with her finger gently, "that's supposed to mean heroism, but it was pinned on a lie. They tried to decorate me while erasing the others." Someone in the gallery, a young man in military uniform, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't the only one. "I was told to move on, that my career was intact, that speaking up would make it political. So I stayed quiet. I buried my brothers and I buried the truth with them." Eleanor paused, not for drama,
but because the weight of the moment demanded stillness. You don't give someone a medal, then redact their mission. You don't send a folded flag and then delete the names of the dead. And you don't ask someone to carry the memory of a cover-up while calling it closure. Her voice had cracked on that last word, the only fracture in an otherwise steel-tempered tone. Admiral Ridgway finally stood. All eyes turned to him. He wasn't supposed to speak. He was only there as an observer, per Department of Defense order. But he walked slowly to the witness stand, removed the hat from his head, and looked the judge square in the eye. "With the court's permission," he said, "I'd like to clarify the record." The judge gave a slight nod. Ridgway took a breath. "The footage shown today is authentic. It was part of an encrypted internal archive, Operation Grey Dagger, Tier Sigma 2 clearance. I was briefed on its failure in 2010. I knew the names, I knew the timeline, and I knew the recommendations to seal it." The courtroom leaned in. "I signed the report," his voice cracking for the first time. "I told myself it was for national security. I told myself the mission was too complex, too politically fragile. But it wasn't about security. It was about liability." A beat. He turned to Eleanor. She asked questions. She wrote letters. Her transfer got delayed, then denied. I told myself she was just a corporal, that she'd forget it all eventually. But she didn't. She remembered every name. Ridgway's eyes shimmered, but he kept speaking. "The men who died on that hill died because of our hesitation. We gave the order to hold position, to wait for air support that never came. It wasn't an ambush, it was indecision. And indecision is a decision." He turned to the judge. "I am submitting my resignation, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the gallery. "This woman, this soldier, is not here to defend herself. She's here to defend the memory of the ones we failed." He walked back to the gallery in silence. No fanfare, no applause. Just the sound of boots crossing courtroom tiles. Eleanor didn't react, not with a smile, not with vindication. Just a single inhale, like surfacing from underwater. The judge leaned forward again. "Miss Hartley, if you had the chance to make one request of this court, one action we could take, what would it be?" Eleanor looked up. "Restore the names." "Excuse me?" "There are 3 names missing from the Wall of the Fallen: Corporal Damian Wright, Lance Corporal Ezra Boone, Sergeant Miguel Tavares. Their families never received full details. No honors, no medals, nothing but form letters. I want their names on the record, publicly." The judge nodded slowly. "Request noted." He glanced at the prosecutor, who was visibly sweating now. "Counselor, I assume you will be withdrawing the charges of evidence mishandling?" The man just nodded in stunned silence. The judge turned back to Eleanor. "Miss Hartley, if you had the chance to make one request of this court, one action we could take, what would it be?" Eleanor looked up. "Restore the names." "Excuse me?" "There are 3 names missing from the Wall of the Fallen: Corporal Damian Wright, Lance Corporal Ezra Boone, Sergeant Miguel Tavares. Their families never received full details. No honors, no medals, nothing but form letters. I want their names on the record, publicly." The judge nodded slowly. "Request noted." He glanced at the prosecutor, who was visibly sweating now. "Counselor, I assume you will be withdrawing the charges of evidence mishandling?" The man just nodded in stunned silence. The judge turned back to Eleanor. Miss Hartley, if you had the chance to make one request of this court, one action we could take, what would it be? Eleanor looked up. The hallway was lined with reporters, aides, junior officers in dress blues pretending not to look too interested. But they looked. Everyone did. No one stopped her. Not anymore. Not after what had just happened inside. As she made her way past the elevators, she heard it, a whisper, faint, low, but deliberate. Not gossip, not speculation. Gray dagger. She froze. It came from a man in civilian clothes, mid-40s, seated on a bench near the vending machines. Clean cut, posture too straight for someone not in service. The kind of man who didn't need a badge to signal authority. Their eyes met. He didn't flinch. "Excuse me?" Eleanor said, carefully. The man stood, slowly, calmly. "I was at Rota, Logistics. We were the ones tasked with coordinating extraction support for Sierra Group when the call came in." She narrowed her eyes. "No one was supposed to know that." He nodded once. "We weren't supposed to exist either, but everyone has a file somewhere, and your name kept popping up, after Kandahar, after Kabul, after Gray Dagger." He stepped closer, voice still soft. "I just wanted to see you in person." "Why?" she asked, tension creeping into her voice. "Because I never forgot that message, the one you sent when you realized support wasn't coming. You wrote it in shorthand, right?" Eleanor blinked. He recited it. "Whisper holds, sky silent, brothers fading, heart still. Orders?" She inhaled sharply. No one outside the operation should have known that phrase. It wasn't in any report, not in any official comms log. She had scribbled it into a broken wristboard with a felt marker, seconds before losing radio contact. It was meant for her CO, who never replied. "I don't understand," she said. "We intercepted it at Rota. Protocol was to log and discard, but I kept it, printed it. It's in my drawer. Been there 13 years. Why? Because it didn't sound like a soldier asking for permission. It sounded like someone bracing for the unthinkable and doing it alone." His voice was steady, almost too calm. "You should know, that message went further than you think. We were ordered not to act, but 3 of us tried. The Black Hawk that attempted to scramble was grounded, but we still tried."
I was unconscious, she whispered. I only remember fire, then silence. He nodded again. That silence saved you. Another beat passed. I wanted you to know, your message was heard. Maybe not in time, maybe not by the right people, but it wasn't forgotten. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded page, yellowed, faintly creased. Copy of the comms transcript. Thought maybe you should have it. Eleanor hesitated, then took it. The familiar letter stared back at her, her own handwriting reconstructed from intercepted signals. 13 years old, and yet still vibrating with the desperation of that moment. She folded it without a word and placed it beside the medal in her bag. I'm not looking for recognition. I know. I'm not looking for apologies either. I didn't come to give one. He paused. But there's something else. What? He glanced around and leaned slightly closer. You're not the only one asking questions. Gray Dagger wasn't the only mission sealed. There's movement happening, inside. Quiet movement. People who remember. People who saw what they weren't supposed to see. They're starting to talk.
Eleanor's pulse quickened. "And they're asking about you." The hallway felt colder now. Not in a sinister way, but in the way a storm feels right before it breaks open. That dense, electric stillness. He handed her a small card. No name. Just a number and a code name. Warrant Echo, if you ever want to talk. She took it without a word. He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing," he said. "The other three on the hill, Boone, Wright, Tavares, they weren't just soldiers. They were messengers, too. They believed that story would surface someday." He looked her in the eye one last time. "Now it has a voice." And with that, he disappeared down the corridor, swallowed by the crowd, another ghost in a suit. Eleanor stood still for a long time, not because she didn't know where to go, but because, for the first time in over a decade, she knew this wasn't over. 3 days later, Eleanor sat on the back porch of a borrowed cabin deep in the wooded hills outside Quantico. No headlines, no cameras, just wind moving through the trees like a memory she wasn't sure she had lived. The medal still sat in her bag, untouched since the courthouse. But the paper, the intercepted comms, she had read it 5 times. She wasn't hiding, not exactly, but silence had always been her armor.
And out here, surrounded by branches and shadows, she felt anonymous again, until her phone rang. It wasn't her personal line. It wasn't even her secondary. It was the number on the black phone, the one only 5 people in the world were supposed to have. She hesitated before answering. Eleanor, a woman's voice, calm, controlled. "Who is this?" "You don't know me, but I know who you are. I've been briefed on Grey Dagger, Whisper Protocol, and the buried units from Sierra Group. You're not forgotten, not anymore." Eleanor stood from the porch chair, adrenaline trickling into her limbs like old blood, rediscovered. "What do you want?" "I'm with Joint Command Liaison Unit 7, Washington. I was told to make contact discreetly, off the record." "By who?" A pause. "Admiral Kincaid." Eleanor blinked. That name wasn't just familiar, it was legacy. Kincaid was one of the few who had ever advocated for female deployment in shadow ops, the kind who disappeared from press briefings but reshaped history behind closed doors. "He's gone," Eleanor said carefully. "Officially, yes, but some of his network stayed behind, quietly, watching, waiting for the right signals." "And you think this is the time?" "No, you already started it, when you showed up in that courtroom. I didn't come for attention. You didn't need to. The right people were already watching." Eleanor walked back into the cabin, shutting the door behind her. Her breath had steadied, but her mind was racing. This wasn't just a nod of respect. This was a call to something else. "I'm listening." "There's a file, compartmentalized, stamped C94SO. You were listed under alias Thorn Echo." "I know the file. It's sealed." "Not anymore. We decrypted fragments last week, enough to confirm 2 things. 1, your extraction delay during Grey Dagger was deliberate. The team assigned to recover you was redirected to a higher-profile target." Eleanor sat on the floor, hand gripping the edge of the couch. "Redirected?" "For optics, politics. The brass didn't want a story about a female sniper surviving a failed covert op. They wanted a cleaner win, a rescue mission with all the right faces. And 2, someone signed off on it, someone who's still in a position of power." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because there's a hearing being called, quietly, off record. military oversight. They're finally addressing unacknowledged actions from 2009 to 2014.
You're on the list. As a witness? As a survivor. Eleanor's laugh was sharp, bitter. I wasn't supposed to survive. Exactly why you need to speak. She was silent for a moment, then asked, "What about Boone?" "Right. Tavares. They'll be named, honored, posthumously. And the mission? Still classified. Of course. But it starts with you." Eleanor looked out the window where the woods shifted in the late light. Grey Dagger had never been about the kill. It had always been about the silence, the void that followed those who came back and never got to explain why they couldn't sleep through the night. Now, maybe, the silence was cracking. "I'll come," she said, finally, "but not for them." "I understand. I'll come for the ones who never made it out, the ones who had no names on medals, no graves with flags, just ghosts waiting for someone to remember. You're not alone in this anymore. I never was. I just forgot how to speak." She ended the call, and for the first time in years, opened her duffel bag and pulled out the uniform jacket, the one that had been folded for over a decade. She laid it across the table like a flag. Then she reached for the service photo, the one with all four of them, grinning like they didn't know what was coming. She set it next to the jacket. Tomorrow she would go, but tonight she would remember. The room wasn't a courtroom, not officially, but the stakes were higher than any trial. Eleanor walked in alone, no lawyer, no rank, just her uniform jacket and the folded flag she carried in both hands. The panel of officials glanced up, unsure whether to treat her like a witness or a warning. "You are Echo Thorne, SEAL Team 9. "I still am," she answered quietly. They asked questions. She answered each one without notes. Operation Grey Dagger, the mission that never made headlines, the teammates whose names never appeared on walls. "I was left behind, but I didn't disappear. I waited for the truth to catch up. And now it had." At the end, she placed a single photo on the table. 4 soldiers in desert gear, one of them smiling, rifle slung across her back. "No report is complete without them," she said, then turned to leave. "Captain Thorne," one of the officials called after her, "what should we tell the press?" She paused, then smiled faintly. "Tell them we never needed recognition, just remembrance." And with that, she was gone.